Let's examine the question of what is abnormal. And for that, you basically have to try and figure out what's normal. And sometimes it's not always easy to determine what's normal and what's not. So that's why there's a variety of ways to look at it. For example, you could personally define, based on your own feelings, what you feel comfortable with. So maybe you're okay with the way that you're behaving, but other people may not be, or something to that degree. So personally, you may be okay with the way that a friend of yours is acting, but other people around them may not. So again, it's a question of what's normal, what's not, and how do you know? How do you determine? Because eventually we've got to get to the point where we've got to be able to diagnose people as having a disorder. And so it all goes back to the question of what's normal and what's not. Now, sometimes we base it on what we call maladaptive behavior. Let's break that word down and see what that means. If behavior is adaptive, okay, if it's adaptive, then that means that you can modify and change your behavior to fit whatever situation you may be in. But if your behavior is maladaptive, that basically means you can't do that. That your behavior is so set in stone, it's so structured, and it's to the point where you literally cannot change or modify your behavior based on where you're at or who you're around. That's not a good thing. So, that's one thing that we could consider when we discuss abnormality. The other thing is we oftentimes have to look at the social definition. What does society say is okay or not okay? And so sometimes this is defined according to the time or the place that the behavior occurs. For example, if you get up in the middle of the night and you're not wearing anything at all, and you walk down your hallway to the restroom, use the restroom, and then go back to your bedroom, that may be considered okay at your house at that time of night when everybody's asleep. But if you do that in the middle of a school building, somebody's going to come running. Okay? That's not acceptable behavior. So society has to define what's okay and what's not. And like I say, sometimes it depends on when and where and who else is around as to whether or not it's okay or not. So the problem is, how do we define what's abnormal? And that's going to lead us to looking at two or three things here. What we're going to say, for our purposes, we're going to define abnormal behavior to exist if one of the following three things is present. Okay, so if any one of these things is present, we're going to define it to be abnormal. If you or someone around you feels subjective discomfort because of somebody's behavior or your behavior, well, then we're going to define that to be abnormal. So this could be you and a group of friends walking through Walmart, and all of a sudden one of your friends does something, and you look over and you go, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they're doing this. I am so embarrassed. I'm humiliated. I do not want to be associated with this person right now. Then we could consider that abnormal behavior because it's creating subjective discomfort. Now, if you're walking around with that same person and they do that behavior and you and them are both totally okay with it and there's no discomfort, then it may be okay for you, but you got to think of others around you. If the store manager feels discomfort, if they're not happy that you're doing that behavior, then that could still be considered abnormal behavior. Linus. You got to look at Linus here. Linus this kid is over 60 years old. I don't know if you know that or not, but he's over 60 years old, and he still sucks his thumb, and he still walks around with a blanket all the time. That's not normal for a 60-year-old person, and it might create some discomfort. Second thing, if the behavior is totally eccentric, in other words, if it's way out there, if you look and somebody's doing something, you go, whoa, what in the world is that guy doing? And it's just bizarre compared to everybody else, then we can define it as being abnormal. Now, if we take, for example, Santa Claus, I don't know what your feelings about Santa are, but now that you're a little older, let's talk about the truth. Okay? Santa happens to be a little eccentric. First of all, you're talking about a guy who essentially works one day a year. That's not normal. He always wears around a funny suit and a hat. Doesn't look like anybody else I've seen around. He works with a lot of little people around all year long. And then when he does go out in public, he usually hangs around shopping malls. And what's worse is he allows little children, he encourages little children to come up and sit on his knee and tell him their deepest, darkest secrets. And the thing is, parents allow this. If you really look at this guy, and then you go a step further and you say, okay, what does he do when he works? Well, he goes around to little kids' houses and he sneaks in the house at night when nobody can see him. Folks, if anybody else did this, they would be considered a pervert. That's exactly what Santa is. He's a pervert. It's incredible that we still allow the guy to do this. And I think there ought to be like an online movement or something to try and get this guy out of his position, because it's not right. Lastly, if there's an extreme change in behavior, if grandma has been just fine for all these years and doing the same old stuff and so forth, and then all of a sudden in about a 3 to 4 month time period, she keeps forgetting things. She does some very bizarre things. She talks in ways that you don't understand sometimes, or she'll talk about stuff that is not even present or not even real. That could indicate some abnormal behavior. So again, if any of these three things occur, we're going to basically say that we can define it to be abnormal. Now, if we look historically, how have things been kind of clarified in the past? We go back to our friend Freud. Years ago, everything, all kinds of mental disorders, all of them that existed, were basically put in one of two categories. Freud came up with these terms, neurosis and psychosis. You've heard these and you will hear them still today, although technically they're not current today. A neurosis, or a neurotic behavior, basically that was a mild disorder. Something like OCD, when somebody's obsessed with a thought, or they're compulsive about a particular behavior, they keep doing the same thing over and over. Somebody who's got a lot of anxiety, maybe has a panic attack, those kind of things are neurotic or neurosis type behaviors in the old terms. Psychosis or psychotic behavior, that was a major thing. That was a major disorder. And the way you could tell is because somebody who had a psychotic type behavior, they had a break with reality. They're hearing things that don't exist. They're seeing things that don't exist. They have beliefs that are totally not true. That's a psychotic type episode. So everything years ago was put in one of two categories, either neurotic or psychotic. The problem with that is it didn't tell us much. Okay, for that part. If somebody said, "Oh, I have a neurotic issue," that doesn't really, I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't know what they're doing. So what we've done over the last 40 or 50 years is we've now come up with a new way of categorizing disorders, and that's what we're going to look at here. Disorders today are based on what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's a book. If you pardon the way I say this, but it's kind of like a psychiatrist Bible. It's got everything in it that the psychiatrist or a counselor who's trying to diagnose someone, everything that they need. Okay? And it breaks things down now into many, many different categories of disorders. And that's what we're going to look at in class, are a lot of these different disorders, these different categories. So for example, if I said, okay, I have an anxiety disorder, then you pretty much know, okay, I've got either generalized anxiety disorder, I may have panic attacks, I may have OCD, or something in that ballpark. But it gives you kind of a list, a much smaller list of things to talk about or to think about. So saying that I have an anxiety disorder is much more clear than saying I had a neurotic issue. Okay? Now, previously, we've had the DSM-3, the DSM-4. Now we're currently just in 2013, the DSM-5 came out. When they update it, sometimes they change some of the classifications, sometimes they change the terminology, various things like that. For example, years ago we used to talk about multiple personality disorder. Now we don't, technically that's not correct. We talk about DID, or dissociative disorders, basically. Dissociative identity disorder, that's what I was trying to think of. So basically it's the same thing, we just rename it. And sometimes they change some of the classifications. So the DSM-5 just came out. That's what we're going to be examining in class. And hopefully this helps to clarify like what's normal and what's not.